So your goal today is going to be to investigate this research question. What is the effect of distance on time for an airplane trip using data that you're collecting off of the internet using the same software that people use when they're trying to find flights to travel from one city to another? I just want to walk you through the steps here because they're a little bit complicated, but you'll get them. As you can see down here, we've got like a kind of a grid of different cities on it. And your first task will be to find a trip that you think could be interesting. For example, if you wanted to go from New York to San Francisco, we would find New York in this top column and then go down until we see San Francisco. We can see from this grid that from New York to San Francisco is 2,934 miles. If you wanted to go from Chicago to Denver, you would start at Chicago up here and go down to Denver, and Chicago to Denver is 996 miles. Notice Denver to Chicago is also 996 miles. So it's like telling you both directions. But that's where you're going to start, by choosing a specific distance in units of miles using this chart. The next step is to then actually put that information, those two cities, into this program, which you can find at kayak.com. This is not an advertisement for kayak.com, but it tends to be a popular and easy way to find how much flights cost and how long flights are going to take. So if we go to kayak.com and we click on flights, and then we can type in the names of the cities that we're trying to travel from and to. So we'll just try New York to San Francisco here. You don't have to check any of these boxes down here. These can all be blank. And you'll have to choose a date. It doesn't really matter what date. For our purposes, if you were actually looking for tickets, of course it would. But once you have your two cities typed in here, like for example New York City and San Francisco, you can type search, and a bunch of different options will come up. And you want to make sure that you're only looking, this is important, you only want to look at options that are non-stop flights. Notice all of these flights say one stop, one stop, one stop, and the flight times are about 9 hours or so. If we scroll all the way down, we might even find one that says 0 stops. I'm not able to find one here. The easier way to make sure that you're only looking at flights that are non-stop is to uncheck one stop and two stops. The one stop and two stop flights tend to be cheaper because they take longer, but for our purposes today, we only want to look at non-stop flights. Notice when I only have non-stop checked, I can see all of my times have dropped down to like 6.5 hours or so. And all these flights are nonstop, which is good for us. So I'll be able to use this information to identify values for my dependent variable, that is the time of the airplane trip. Notice not all of these trips take exactly the same amount of time. As we see often, there is some uncertainty in the amount of time that this trip takes. So we could use each of these 6 hours and 34 minutes, 6 hours and 35 minutes, 6 hours and 38 minutes. We could use those as different values in our data table for the dependent variable value of how much time the trip takes. One last thing, you notice this is not given in units of hours really. It's given in units of hours and minutes. But in order to enter this into the data table, we need to actually calculate how many hours this is as a decimal. In order to do this, we need to take the number of minutes and divide it by 60, because there are 60 minutes in an hour. We're going to figure out how many total, like what decimal value of an hour this number is. So for example, if I found 6 hours and 34 minutes, I would say 34 divided by 60 equals 0.56667. So I would choose a reasonable number of decimal places here, probably like to the 100th place, to say like, okay, I'm choosing 0.57 hours. That would make this total trip length 6.57 hours. So I'm taking this this number that I calculated and I'm adding 6 to it so that my total trip time is 6.57 hours. That would be one value for my dependent variable, and I could do that again with these other values in order to enter them. And then I want to collect a bunch of data and ultimately make a graph and calculate the slope. Now, the tricky thing is when you have figured out how to make your calculate your slope and initial value and construct an algebraic model from your trend line, you can then use that trend line to figure out the speed of a jet and check that against values that you could research in a different way on the internet. But this is going to take some cleverness. You can't just take one value and do, okay, distance divided by time. That's not the way this works. You can talk about this more later. But the best way to do it is to actually use your slope in a clever way. You have to do a mathematical operation to the slope to figure out what the actual value is. So good luck with that, and have fun researching the flights that you can find.